Palkhivala Memorial Lecture. I'm sure you will join me in welcoming Dr. Jaishankar, who has so kindly agreed to deliver the lecture. I would like to request my co-trustee, Nani A, to present flowers and a memento to Dr. Jaishankar as a small token of our regard and affection. This lecture is being organized in association with the Forum of Free Enterprise, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to its members, and particularly to its president and my co-trustee, Mr. Nani A. I would also like to record our gratitude to the NCPA and Mr. Khushru Santok, who unfortunately is not present here today due to a prior commitment, and to Tata Sons for their continued support and encouragement in our lectures. Nani Palkhivala passed away on 11th December 2002, and some of us, his friends and admirers, formed in 2004 the Nani A Palkhivala Memorial Trust to perpetuate his memory and carry forward the causes to which he devoted his life. To this end, the Trust has instituted prizes in the leading law universities in the country, published 4 books and produced a film on his life and works, holds annual elocution competitions for law students, gives awards to champions of civil liberties, and his portrait adorns the law library in the Supreme Court. But the marquee event of the Trust has always been the annual memorial lecture. We have been fortunate that some of the most illustrious persons, including leading journalists, jurists, Chief Justices of India, governors of the Reserve Bank, and internationally renowned economists, have accepted our invitations over the years to deliver these lectures. Nani was in many ways a Renaissance person, erudite scholar, outstanding jurist, staunch defender of the Constitution, a student of economics and various other religions, and a lover of art, literature, and music. But above all, he was a social reformer who, through his speeches and writings, educated a whole generation on the issues which vitally affected their interests. The profundity of his thoughts and the felicity of his language were equally matched, and he spoke and wrote not merely in India, but also abroad. During his 20 months tenure as India's ambassador in the United States, he spoke to the media on as many as 80 occasions, and he gave 170 lectures at an astonishing rate of 2 lectures per week. In these memorial lectures, we have tried to cover most of the subjects on which Nani wrote and spoke: law, human rights, finance, economic development, education, etc. However, what was lacking was the one subject which provides the glue for these apparently disparate subjects, and which is an essential ingredient for the economic and social development of a country, namely stable external relations. We are filling this gap today, and we are very grateful and deeply honored and privileged that an equally illustrious person in Dr. S. Jaishankar has accepted our invitation to speak to us on this subject. Dr. Jaishankar has a master's degree in political science and a doctorate in international relations from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is a career diplomat who has worked in the Ministry of External Affairs and the President's Secretariat and has been the Indian High Commissioner in Singapore, the Foreign Secretary, and our ambassador in the United States, China, and the Czech Republic. He is the author of two best-selling books. He was awarded the Padma Shri in 2019. Since May 2019, he has been a member of the Rajya Sabha and has been our External Affairs Minister. If in an increasingly polarized world, India is recognized and respected as the world's largest unaligned functioning democracy, much of the credit for this must go to Dr. Jaishankar for his untiring efforts over the years. I would now like to request Dr. Jaishankar to deliver the 19th Nani A Palkhivala Lecture on the subject, India and the World. Dr. Jaishankar.
Mr. Malegam, fellow trustees, distinguished guests, it's a great privilege to be invited to deliver the Nani Palkhivala Memorial Lecture. Now, all of you are conversant with his many contributions in various domains. We heard a little bit about it just now. And he had a well-earned reputation as a defender of freedom and of liberty, as well as an advocate of economic reform. And that too, at a time when it was not accepted wisdom. His two particular incarnations with which I personally connect are the associations with the Tatas and his ambassadorship to the United States. He was, of course, a great patriot, but also one who sought to give practical expression to those sentiments. It is only natural that we all remember him today. 16th January is his birth anniversary, I believe. And our thoughts turn to the prospects of the nation that he served so devotedly. Now, before I get into my remarks, let me also underline that my first significant foreign policy address for 2025 at home is taking place outside New Delhi. This reflects our recognition that the stakeholders now extend well beyond the capital and its officialdom. And in fact, messaging from Mumbai serves to emphasize the economic dimensions of our diplomacy. I'm sure that Nani Palkhivala would appreciate these shifts in our thinking over the last decade. Perhaps a few moments on the state of the world now is also warranted to give a context to India's relationship with it. We are 2 days away from a presidential inauguration in the very country where Ambassador Palkhivala served. It is an event that is expected to have profound consequences for the global order, Rather than perceive it as a cause in itself, we should perhaps analyze it as a symptom of a churning that has now reached a critical point. That process has many dimensions, many issues, including a rebalancing of economic and political power over multiple decades. It has been accelerated by a particular model of globalization, which, while creating greater prosperity, has also led to more insecurity. Conflicts, pandemics, and climate events have actually been aggravating factors in this period. Now, technology too has played its due part by enhancing interdependence and interpenetration. On the one hand, the world is witnessing the weaponization of market shares and financial instruments. On the other, many are left to fend for themselves, be it on health, on debt, or on energy. And this integration and separateness actually coexist in our times. Today, we may well be on the cusp of a new era, one where the United States departs from an established tradition of foreign policy and focuses on its own interests rather than in shaping the world itself, where the focus is more on the compulsions of competition rather than on the observance of regimes. Those most anxious right now are the nations and organizations who are deeply invested in the current order. For them, any significant departure raises risks and questions a long-standing model. For the countries who are less invested, it could very well be a time of opportunity. New openings and novel practices could create space that did not exist earlier. India falls in the latter category. Therefore, the relevance of India to global outcomes will be a subject of ever-increasing interest. A year ago, I wrote a book on why we matter to the world. Now, as global volatility rises, I believe that we do so even more. If the world is to assess us, perhaps politics may be a good place to begin. A successful election in the world's largest democracy, one that provided a renewed mandate, clearly merits global attention. When a government in a democracy gets 3 consecutive terms in this era, it must have done many things right. Continued political stability is enormously helpful to advancing sweeping reforms and ambitious development. For the world, it is also an important factor of comfort. We are already the 5th largest economy, likely to be the 3rd very soon. This is further enhanced by the scale of our talent and the difference it can make to creating trusted supply chains. Simply put, a world in transition has a greater need for what India has to offer. So how does India itself perceive the world? Overall, we have a positive and optimistic view that recognizes opportunities while being cognizant of the risks. This itself sets us apart from many others who are less sanguine about their prospects. There's no question that India has reaped significant gains from a globalized era. Much of that tends to be defined economically, but there are strong political and I would say even cultural facets to it. By any metric, India has visibly risen in the global pecking order, with the likelihood, as I said, of advancing even more. Its increasing activities are visible, but they should not mask the challenges we face. Like the rest of the world, India too has to address the over-concentration in certain geographies of manufacturing and technology. In fact, this task is central to the comprehensive national power that we must continue to build. Let us return to the context once again. The journey of rebalancing in the world has reached a stage today where we can start to discern the emergence of real multipolarity in the global order. It represents a move away, not just from the domination of the West, but from the current structure of world affairs. Technology, as I said, is becoming a greater game changer, impacting balances of power as much as they do the daily routine of our lives. It accelerates the growing tendency to leverage a broad range of activities. The era of chips and AI, electric mobility, green and clean tech, as well as drones and space, all hold transformational possibilities. But the perennial games that nations play still continue unabated. In fact, perhaps they have become even more intense. Sharpening great power competition has given it an added edge, making it now a structural feature of contemporary times. Some of what awaits us is already visible on the horizon. All of this points to a volatile, uncertain, and even turbulent world in the years ahead. Now, the challenge for India is to undertake its rise in such unpredictable circumstances. To do that, it has to accelerate both its internal growth and modernization, as well as de-risk its external exposure. At home, that is best done through political stability, broad-based and inclusive growth, and continuing reforms. It means more focus on manufacturing as well as food and health security, while building the deep strengths that would make us competitive. Strategic autonomy, after all, is acquiring greater economic connotations. It is also vital that India not be left behind in the development of critical and emerging technologies. That means carefully analyzing and prioritizing partners. Obviously, those who share traits of pluralism, democracy, market economy, and rule of law have a natural convergence with us. At the same time, geopolitical factors combined with historical experience will also be part of our calculus. While expanding our options enhances strategic space, this has to be an exercise in realism, not merely one of rhetoric. India may be non-West, but its strategic interest ensure that it is not anti-West. Drawing on a tradition of openness, we also see our global positioning as that of Vishwa Bandhu, a reliable partner and a dependable friend. Our endeavor is to maximize friendships and minimize problems. But this is undertaken with a clear sense of bottom lines and much clarity about our interests. The last decade has demonstrated how to progress on multiple fronts, advancing diverse relationships without making anyone an exclusive one. Polarized situations have also brought out our ability to bridge divides. Building on convergences has been a common feature of India's diplomacy. In a world that is less forthcoming on commitments, India also recognizes the role of middle powers. They're frequently in the lead on their own local, regional issues. And in fact, I mean, this could be by themselves or in regional groupings. And consequently, a conscious effort is underway to bond with such nations, while of course engaging them in more in regional formats. So a mix of all these inclinations today has led to an expanding Indian diplomatic profile with a much wider array of relationships and commitments. And you can see that it is visible from the Gulf and Africa to Latin America, Caribbean, I would say even the Pacific Islands. Though committed to multilateralism, India also has to deal with the reality of greater competition and a deeper gridlock in that world. This encourages engagement through issue-based agendas and partnerships. The Quad, the BRICS, and IMEC are notable examples. But it is actually India's ability to reconcile these memberships that is worth noting. Understandably focused on competitive international relations, what also distinguishes Indian foreign policy is its post-colonial sentiment. We have a deep solidarity with the global South, whose members often see us as their voice. The underlying outlook of the global South, as you all know, is of fierce independence, respect for sovereignty, and resistance to being pressurized on issues of national interest. It explains its inclination to enhance relationship without diluting its freedom of choice. But of course, this is not always easy to understand, and therefore we have to often explain to those who have been brought up in the culture of alliances. So the interactive dynamic between India's domestic outlook and its foreign policy, this must also be grasped if we are to appreciate recent changes. Some key relationships, such as with the United States, China, Pakistan, or Israel, have actually been approached with far greater realism. This is a result of shifts in our country, in our society, in its politics, in its economics, I would say even in our security thinking. Particularly with respect to the United States, India has been able to overcome what Prime Minister Modi has described as the hesitations of history. This phrase actually captures an era where Indian policymakers were instinctively suspicious of the United States and consciously limited the extent of cooperation. By doing so, they not only constrained our own options, but actually created assumptions in this regard among competitors. The debates about the Quad are instructive in this regard. Now, once India abandoned this earlier mindset, the benefits of deeper cooperation have become apparent. They are there for all of you to see. It's unfolding in domains like security, cyber, space, in emerging technologies, to digital, science, education, trade, business. And it has actually encouraged us to work closely on regional, global, and multilateral issues. The key to continuing progress is to expand convergence rather than aim for congruence. Subjecting each other to loyalty tests or nursing unrealistic expectations are obviously not helpful. In fact, I would argue that the intersection of interest today with the United States is already substantial enough for it to serve as a foundation for a high-quality strategic partnership. This is, of course, buttressed by the Indian diaspora as a living bridge. I will say something about that later. And obviously, changes in American policy and posture will have implications for India. But precisely because the complementarity is already strong and is so visible, indicators do point to a robust growth in our cooperation in the days ahead. At a time when most of its relationships are moving forward, India confronts a particular challenge in establishing an equilibrium with China. Much of that arises from the fact that both nations are on the rise as immediate neighbors and the only two societies with over 1 billion people. Their dynamic could have never been easy. But it has been further sharpened by a boundary dispute, by some baggage of history, and by differing socio-political systems. Misreadings by past policymakers, whether they were driven by idealism or by the absence of realpolitik, has actually helped neither cooperation nor competition with China. This has clearly changed in the last decade. Right now, the relationship is trying to disentangle itself from the complications arising from the post-2020 border situation. Even as that is being addressed, more thought needs to be given to the long-term evolution of our ties. Clearly, India has to prepare for expressions of China's growing capabilities, particularly those that impinge directly on our interests. To hold up its own end, a more rapid development of India's comprehensive national power is necessary. This is not just about correcting the earlier neglect of the border infrastructure and the oceanic periphery, but also in mitigating dependence in sensitive domains. There could naturally be practical cooperation undertaken with due diligence. All in all, India's approach can be summed up in terms of what we call the three mutuals: mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest. Bilateral ties can also benefit from a greater realization that what is at stake is actually the larger prospect of both nations, and in fact, without exaggeration, I would say even of the global order. It needs an acceptance that the emergence of a multipolar Asia is an essential prerequisite for a multipolar world. Now, changes in the weight and the stance of the United States and China are among the key factors contributing to the emergence of the Indo-Pacific as a theater. For India, this engagement is a logical extrapolation of its Act East policy that initially focused on the ASEAN. It also reflects a deeper engagement with Japan and with Australia, two fellow members of the Quad mechanism, as also with South Korea. In many ways, the Quad is a grouping foretold by India's vastly improved relationship with its individual constituents. It is also a contemporary method of addressing global and regional deficits through creative and flexible collaboration. Since 2017, which was when the Quad was revived, since 2017, the Quad has made significant progress in areas like climate change, climate action, supply chains, connectivity, digital capabilities, maritime security, and humanitarian assistance and disaster response. This example of countries coming together on a shared agenda is also being replicated elsewhere. A newer example is IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which actually offers a new logistical template. In fact, in the last decade, India has either initiated or joined about 40 different endeavors with multiple partners on specific issues. They speak of an ability to carry different nations on varying subjects without diluting our strategic intent or compromising our national priorities. As a major power of the Eurasian landmass, Russia has long held importance for India's foreign policy. Despite all the ups and downs that the world has seen since 1945, this is actually one relationship that has largely held steady. For decades, Russia has had a salience in India's national security calculus. Currently, as Russia is redirecting its attention towards Asia, there is actually a further logic that is emerging. Deeper economic cooperation between India and Russia has a stabilizing consequence for the global economy. The connectivity potential of the collaboration also holds great promise. India's expanding footprint will inevitably meet Russia's influence in many regions. And like the rest of the world, India is not impervious to the implications of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. It has been a persistent advocate of dialogue and diplomacy and is convinced that a solution cannot emerge from the battlefield. The strategic awakening of Europe is another scenario of considerable interest. In recent years, the impact of supply chain dependence, energy concerns, and geopolitical challenges have been visible on Europe's collective persona. Since 2014, India has consciously stepped up its engagement with the European Union, its individual members, and even its sub-regional groups. The resulting collaborations have been beneficial for our national development. Apart from the US, India is the only nation with whom Europe has established what is called a Trade and Technology Council. Negotiations on a free trade agreement with EU are underway, while that with EFTA, which is a collection of 4 other European nations, was concluded last year. The conversation is now also focusing on India as a production and supply chain partner, especially in domains that value resilience and trust. That Europe now perceives stakes in the Indo-Pacific is a welcome expression of its expanding worldview. Now, an adept navigation of the global landscape, the landscape which I have presented to all of you, that is naturally key to India's prospects. And the task begins closest to home. India's challenge has been to rebuild a neighborhood in the aftermath of the partition. It is now doing so through a generous and non-reciprocal approach, funding and supporting energy, rail, and road connectivity, expanding trade and investment, and intensifying exchanges and contacts. In times of crisis, be it the pandemic or the economic meltdown, India has actually served as an insurance for its smaller neighbors. Sri Lanka discovered that in 2023, when India put together a package of more than $4 billion, even while the rest of the world deterred. It is also a reality that political developments may throw up complex situations, as we are currently witnessing in Bangladesh. The very purpose of closer cooperation and contacts is actually to address such contingencies. At the end of the day, it is the mutuality of interest that should be counted upon to prevail. Pakistan remains the exception in our neighborhood in view of its support for cross-border terrorism. And that cancer is now consuming its own body politic. Obviously, the entire subcontinent has a shared interest in Pakistan abjuring that approach. There are also issues in respect of two other neighbors, Myanmar and Afghanistan. We in India have long-standing people-to-people ties with both societies. And we must be mindful that those more proximate have stakes which are quite different from others far away. Even as India's growth serves as a lifting tide beyond its borders, the extended neighborhood too is keen to revive its historical connections. 3 decades ago, a Southeast Asia led by Singapore displayed that interest, laying the foundation of what then came to be known as the Act East policy. In the last decade, the United Arab Emirates has spearheaded an even deeper effort on the part of the Gulf kingdoms. This region houses India's largest diaspora, is among its key trade partners, as well as a dominant source of its energy needs. It is now increasingly investing in India's growth and partnering it in collaborative ventures. The current conflict in the Middle East is therefore as much a cause of anxiety to India as it is to others. Getting the balance right between countering terrorism, minimizing civilian casualties, providing humanitarian support, and promoting a two-state solution sums up our approach. To the south, Prime Minister Modi in 2015 laid out a strategic maritime outlook, which we call Sagar, that provides for forging much closer ties with other island nations of the Indian Ocean. And towards the north, the initiation of a structured engagement with the Central Asia Five marks the next stage of our partnership. In the mandala of Indian foreign policy, this extension of the neighborhood actually provides launching pads for India to operate beyond, be it the Indo-Pacific, Africa, the Caucasus, or Eurasia. Since 2023, India has also convened 3 Voice of the Global South summits to bring to the fore pressing concerns of the developing world. As India rises, the expectations from the Global South are that it would champion their interests, and that expectation would go commensurately. Our G20 presidency and supply of COVID vaccines to 99 nations has certainly strengthened India's credentials. Already, India is among the top trade and investment partners of many African nations, but it is steadily moving up the ranks where Latin America and the Caribbean are concerned. Political solidarity and economic activities are strengthened by Indian development projects, which today cover 78 nations across different continents. And we are deeply involved in training and capacity building in many of these countries. For nations of the Global South, India serves as an encouragement because our achievements can be easily transported to their societies. And this has become particularly apparent in digital, in health, and in educational domains. Among the challenges that India confronts, because that too is a subject we need to look at, among the challenges that we confront is the architecture, actually, of the current global order. And this is an architecture that was devised 8 decades ago. Since then, the membership of the United Nations has actually quadrupled. And the post-colonial world has staged an economic and political recovery, which is, of course, still underway. And these constitute very powerful arguments for change. However, the United Nations remains obstinately stuck in the past, mainly due to the vested interests of a few. By resisting the reform of multilateralism, these nations do it no favor. On the contrary, countries are compelled to search for solutions beyond the orthodox constructs. Where India is concerned, we seek to harness a growing body of world opinion that would like to see India permanently in the Security Council, even while we are active in the interim. Now, while the United Nations may be a focal point of this debate, forces of change are also creating new institutions and new groupings. These are being assessed and in many cases even being initiated by India in a utilitarian manner. Apart from institutions, there will be the inevitable tussle regarding agenda setting. India has already been active with regard to counterterrorism and maritime security. These were two issues which we took up very strongly when we were last in the Security Council. But there are entrenched issues like trade, development, and climate action, as well as emerging issues like AI, cyber, and space. One aspect of the transition India is undergoing is our keenness today in contributing more to the setting of rules and standards. Of late, India has also been a source of ideas and initiatives for global good, such as the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. We have been a vigorous advocate of food security, of climate-friendly lifestyles and wellness practices, and all of you know about the International Day of Yoga. Progress in India will be a crucial aspect of achieving global SDG targets by 2030. That the country is striving hard in this regard must be appreciated, as indeed our influence on others who are similarly engaged. Another dimension of India undertaking growing responsibilities is our role today as a first responder when it comes to natural calamities and other situations. And we have seen that from earthquakes in Turkey and Nepal to cyclones and mudslides across the Indian Ocean. We have provided both vaccines, medicines, medical personnel to other nations during the COVID pandemic. And this approach, this thinking, is equally visible as we deploy multiple naval ships to counter drone attacks and piracy in the Northern Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Aden. In fact, contrary to the trend that is today prevailing in the world, India is actually stepping forward to undertake more global obligations. Now, it is not just our intent, but also capabilities that have caught the world's attention. Much of what has changed, and I would urge you to reflect on that, much of what has actually changed is because 75 years of modern democracy have actually transformed our society. We are today visibly less elitist and reflect progress on a much wider landscape. Whether it is politics, business, bureaucracy, or sports, exemplars are more grounded and more homegrown. They use a different vocabulary, they propagate their particular concepts, and they voice their own ambitions. Much of their thinking is rooted in our culture and our heritage. And at the same time, there is a deep passion to forge ahead in the quest of modernity. Prime Minister Modi is himself both an example and a spokesperson of this phenomenon. His advocacy of respecting tradition while advancing technology resonates widely in the country, I would argue even beyond. This has even ignited a debate about the self-description of the nation. Through the greater usage of the historical name Bharat, we signal a civilizational state regaining its place in the Committee of Nations. The narrative of India as a democracy that delivers is also gaining traction. A return to high growth after the COVID is a testimony to the responsible manner in which the pandemic was handled, as well as of the reforms that were undertaken in this period. by making it easier to do business, ensuring ease of living by debureaucratizing, building a modern infrastructure, prioritizing the manufacturing sector, and ensuring greener growth. The nation today is on course to realize its potential. An enthusiastic embrace of the digital technology world has also vastly improved governance, enabling welfare benefits to be distributed with increasing efficiency and scale. At the same time, educational reforms and promotion of innovation has helped create the world's third biggest startup ecosystem. Now, all of this matters because they contribute to India's overall progress, certainly, but in the eyes of the world, they overcome our past reputation as a development laggard. The enormity of the transformation that is underway is highlighted by a digital backbone. And I would like you to appreciate the consequences of this. We today provide nutritional support regularly to 815 million people in this country, or subsidized or free health access to 340 million. We give loans every year to 58 million small businesses. And in the last decade, we have built 40 million homes. That means for almost 200 million people, for those with low income. Now, this happens even as age-old challenges of electricity, piped water, toilets, and roads are being addressed. In the last decade, a record number of people have come out of poverty, and the expansion of the middle class has considerable production and consumption implications. But beyond the story of economic mobility, there are milestones that indicate what the future holds. In the last decade, India has built 7 new airports annually, almost 1.5 to 2 metro systems per year, laid 28 kilometers of national highway and 12 to 14 kilometers of railway track per day. It has doubled its educational institutions in the same period. And this is now an era of moon landings and a Mars mission, of COVID vaccines and digitally tracked vaccination, of an indigenously developed 5G stack, of drones and of nano fertilizers. One where Apple has now set up a large production base in the country. Every month, 13 to 16 billion digital cashless transactions, which are multiple times the level of the United States and China put together. This is what is actually happening around us. Now, sometimes all of this is taken for granted at home. But I assure you, the world definitely sees the change, its scale, and its intensity. Now, the examples of such changes are visible in other domains as well. Colonial era penal codes have finally been replaced by those which are more appropriate to national circumstances. Education in Indian languages has found greater encouragement. Appreciation for local products is gaining ground. And in fact, so is the interest of one region about the culture and heritage of another. Economically, the big difference is the Make in India campaign, aimed also for making for the world. It seeks to reverse the deindustrialization of the past and even contemplates leapfrogging in different areas. Underlying it is a belief that only by reviving manufacturing can India actually generate its own technologies. But beyond its borders, efforts are also underway to restore connectivity disrupted first by colonialism and then by partition. In its immediate periphery, we see that visible in projects with virtually every neighbor. I spoke to you about that earlier. And it has been provided, and it has provided the basis for contemplating an extended neighborhood that revives relationships dormant in the recesses of history. So the relevance of this new India to global politics, this arises not just from our growing abilities, but also the circumstances of its rise. Particularly in the light of COVID experiences, there is today in the world, and this is a very broad sentiment, a much sharper awareness of the risks to the international economy of over-concentration, whether we are talking about manufacturing or of emerging technologies. And then there is the weaponization that I spoke about, weaponization of economic capabilities, including market shares. And that has become a major source of anxiety. The digital era has also brought forth its own set of challenges focused on trust and transparency. Individuals and societies can no longer be agnostic about where their data resides and how and by whom it is harnessed. Yet, the reality of globalization cannot be denied. So we have to find solutions that are much more in the direction of de-risking rather than decoupling. In the search for collaborative answers, India certainly can make a difference. Its improving manufacturing can embed it much more deeply into contemporary supply chains. Our digital and now emerging semiconductor capabilities can make us a partner of consequence. Already there are somewhere 1,800 global capability centers operating in India, which are generating an impressive level of exports with the promise of growing steadily. These trends would be reinforced by rapid modernization and higher growth rates that we intend to achieve. In different ways, debates on the key global issues of our times will also lead the world towards India. For a start, the knowledge economy is putting a premium on deployable human resources. This comes at the very time when the more advanced societies are facing growing demographic deficits. An upcoming trend is the interest in accessing Indian talent through mobility understandings. That India is itself encouraging greater innovation, expanding its skills base and making it easier to do business will surely contribute to more such partnerships. And even while moving in this direction, the world is cognizant of the concerns of sustainability as well as clean and green growth. The contribution of India to the domain of climate action is significant. We can also be an exemplar to other developing societies. A unique element of India's engagement with the world is the role of our diaspora. Now, in that regard too, Nani Palkhivala was actually ahead of his times. Many of you would be aware that we have just concluded a Pravasi Bharatiya Divas convention in Odisha. And acronyms like NRIs, PIOs, and OCIs, which we use so prolifically today, they had not been invented during Nani Palkhivala's times. But it's interesting, one of his last acts as ambassador in the United States, he actually held an event to pay tribute to 14 outstanding Indians living abroad. And today we honor diaspora Indians by presenting Pravasi Bharatiya Saman Awards. Interestingly, Palkhivala, whose individual initiative this was, he titled the awards he presented as Exemplar of Excellence and Explorer of Brahma. And I should tell you, the recipients included Hargovind Khurana, the Nobel laureate, S. Chandrasekhar, the astrophysicist and Nobel laureate, and Zubin Mehta. A dimension of contemporary world politics that is often overlooked is the significance of connectivity. As production and consumption centers have both diversified and expanded, and corridors. the natural changes to repair the colonial era disruptions actually have still not advanced as much as they should. Of course, in recent times, we have seen some major initiatives, but these have been largely national and unilateral. I think most of you understand what I'm talking about. Currently, a more comprehensive and consultative set of connectivity endeavors are underway. And I would emphasize that they hold particular promise for India. Notable to our west are the IMEC corridor that I spoke about, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, and the International North-South Transport Corridor. Now, these are two different corridors, both of which lead westwards, eventually into Europe. To the east, there is the Trilateral Highway, which begins from India through Myanmar all the way east on land, and the Chennai-Vladivostok corridor on sea. Now, put together, and realizing these connectivity corridors will not be easy, but we are very determined to do so. Put together, actually, they will be logistical economic game changers, because they will actually connect the Atlantic to the Pacific, mostly on land, some part of it on sea, but with India at its center. And this will happen at the very time when the Indian economy will also be shifting to a higher gear. So these were some of the aspects of how India engages the world and why we are much more relevant to it. But the net takeaway from this is really a story of greater prominence, a story of greater relevance. And for that very reason, it is also only natural that the world is asking itself, what kind of power will India be when it becomes larger and stronger? Recent experiences with others will surely encourage the world, to take history, culture, and politics into account. On each score, I would emphasize that there is reason to rest assured. Throughout its existence, India has been a pluralistic society open to the world. Unlike the vast majority of nations we have today in international relations, India has never espoused a single ethnicity, language, or belief system as a defining identity. On the contrary, it has a deep civilizational unity which has always allowed diversity to flourish. Today, that self-awareness of its heritage and tradition not only drives a national revival, but actually encourages engaging the world more confidently. Similarly, Indian democracy too is ingrained in a consultative culture all the way down to the grassroots. This is a natural political expression of social and intellectual pluralism that is embedded in the Indian ethos. As development spreads its benefits, Indian democracy too has emerged stronger, has emerged more authentic. Certainly, our political representation currently is perhaps the broadest we have ever had in history. Where India's business outlook is concerned, this too is very much in sync with other domains. Despite decades of left-leaning ideology imposing regulations and state control, entrepreneurship and commerce were resilient enough in our country to survive. Indeed, Nani Palkhivala himself was a strong proponent of these traits in very difficult circumstances. And I want today to recall his words describing that era. And he says, perhaps there is no other country on earth which has in such ample measure all the enterprises and skills needed to create national wealth, and which takes such deliberate and endless pains to restrict and hamper its creation. Fortunately, that era is behind us. Today, we strive to make it easier to do business, to reduce the burden of regulations, to expand the forces of production and innovation, because it is only then that we can be effective in employment generation. It is a combination of these different dimensions that will define India in the days to come. On the world stage, it will not only drive political and economic rebalancing, but probably a cultural one as well. India's growing capacities are now on display in various fields, whether it is production or consumption, technology or connectivity. It is featuring more in the assessment of others. While India's rise has clearly global consequences, its progress in various domains also has a resonance with a broader constituency. When the global order is under churn, the international community is well served by the endeavors of a power, by the growing endeavors of a power that is comfortable with the world. A stronger India will contribute more, undertake greater responsibilities, and facilitate the de-risking of the international economy. In fact, our economic energies can help shape the re-globalization process, which is underway, and add to the engines of global growth. Strategically, India's voice and influence will strengthen those who seek respect for international norms, rules, and law. For all these reasons and more, India's more prominent role in world politics will be welcomed. As we forge new pathways in the world that awaits us, the guidance provided by Nani Palkhivala and others like him serve as a compass. Their dedication and commitment has brought us now to the level where we can make an increasing difference to global outcomes. In fact, the ideas and values espoused by Nani Palkhivala have an even greater meaning as we enter this new stage of development that I have described. Our deep respect for his contributions is best expressed by raising the level of our ambitions and striving hard for the realization of a Viksit Bharat. I thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Nani A. Palkhivala Memorial Trust, I must first propose a vote of thanks, not only on the trust behalf, but on all of you, on all your behalf, for a truly outstanding 19th Memorial Lecture. The Trust will be printing the text of the lecture for free and wide distribution. And I must particularly thank the Honorable Minister for taking the time to come to Bombay. After we learned of the news of your special invitation to attend the inauguration, we were slightly doubtful whether the lecture would go on. And I'm so glad that he has taken the trouble to come to Bombay. And will be going to Washington from Mumbai itself. Thank you so much, sir. I must also thank Mr. K.N. Santuk, Chairman of the NCPA, for providing this magnificent Tata Theatre Trust free of cost for this lecture, and the entire team of NCPA for their support. I must thank Tata Sons for their continued support for the program, thank the Forum of Free Enterprise and the entire team for arranging today's program. I must also thank various officials of the External Affairs Ministry for helping coordinate this entire lecture. Thanks to the press, and above all, Thanks to the entire wonderful audience for taking the trouble of coming here. I would now request all of you to stand for the national anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंग विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 जय
Jai. Jai.
Jaya